biscuit dough hit the floor with a sickening slap, sending flour in a white cloud across the wooden kitchen. A crow cawed once from the open window, then silence. Maybelle stood frozen, her eyes wide, mouth open slightly, like she wanted to apologize but forgot how to speak. Her sleeves had rolled back when she'd reached for the bowl, and Caleb saw the bruises, then faint yellow and violet marks circling her forearms like cruel fingerprints. He didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, his broad frame leaning against the doorpost, a coffee mug cooling in his grip. Outside, the morning broke slow and amber across the dry hills, the cattle lowed in the distance, and the world smelled of wood smoke and fried salt pork. Inside the kitchen, air hung heavy with the smell of lard, fear, and something unspoken. Maybelle knelt quickly to scoop the dough with shaking hands, brushing flour off her dress, avoiding his eyes. "Sorry, Mr. Rowe," she murmured. "I'll make another batch." Caleb took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes steady on her hands, on how they trembled. He saw the flinch she tried to hide when the tin pan clattered into the sink. He set the mug down gently, the sound soft, deliberate. Then he turned and walked out, boots echoing against the wooden porch. Not a word said, but something had cracked. In the kitchen, in his chest. The dog barked once, then lay down again by the stove. The Bruises were old, but not old enough. Caleb Rowe had lived alone on Barrow Hill Ranch for 7 years. The house was built from pale pine, its shutters warped from wind and time, and the front gate hung slightly crooked, always half open, like it expected someone who never came. Caleb never fixed it. He fixed fences, tended his horses, and patched saddle leather with precision, but not the gate. Some things stayed broken like habit. He was a large man, still built like the scout he once was, with shoulders that filled a doorway and hands that looked like they could choke a tree. His hair had gone gray at the temples too early, but his eyes remained dark and alert. There was a scar behind his left ear, thin as a knife point, a souvenir from a time he no longer spoke of. He rode a bay mare named Tully and slept with a colt peacemaker under the floorboard beside his bed. Not because he expected trouble, because he remembered it. Folks in town called him Widowmaker, though not to his face. He wasn't cruel, just quiet. Never drank at the saloon, didn't go to church, never raised his voice, didn't laugh. Some thought he might be simple. Others whispered of things he did in the war out west, Apache blood union brass bounty work. He never corrected them. Silence had become his armor. Caleb lived by routine. Breakfast at dawn, ride the pastures by 8, back before noon. In winter he mended tools. In summer he broke colts. But nothing in his pattern allowed for people not for more than a few days, which is why it surprised even himself when he hired Maybelle to cook. It happened after Mrs. Tolland, the older widow who used to prepare meals twice a week, broke her hip and moved to her daughter's place in Kansas City. Maybelle had shown up on a dry Tuesday with a note of reference, a small carpetbag, and eyes too wide for her narrow face. She spoke gently, said she'd cooked for ranchers before, could make biscuits and ham gravy that'd quiet a preacher. Caleb had watched her for a moment, then nodded once and stepped aside. He didn't ask where she'd come from. He didn't ask who gave her the bruises. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with the smell of cornbread and coffee again. The old dog Jasper started sleeping in the kitchen instead of the porch. Caleb didn't talk much to Maybelle, but he noticed how she avoided the mirror in the hall and always wore long sleeves even when it was hot. He noticed how she kept a packed satchel under the bed in the spare room. She never used the front door, only the back. One night, while checking the perimeter after a fox spooked the chickens, Caleb found her standing barefoot in the moonlight behind the barn, shoulders hunched, a small silver locket clutched in both hands. She didn't hear him approach. When she did, she wiped at her eyes and turned fast, too fast, like she was ready to run. He said nothing, just nodded, then turned and walked back toward the house, the light of the lantern swaying in his hand. That was Caleb Rowe, a man who didn't touch the past, who didn't pry, who didn't intervene, until that morning with the dough, until the bruises, until something unseen began to unravel the silence he'd spent so long building. Her name was Maybelle Cutter. She said it soft, like a name not meant to echo. The first time she introduced herself, she looked down when she spoke, eyes fixed on her scuffed shoes like the syllables might break underfoot. She wasn't from anywhere she wanted to return to. That much was clear. Maybelle was small-boned with dark curls tied back in a simple braid and hands worn from kitchens and washboards. She had a way of holding her breath before speaking like words might betray her. She kept to her work, rising before dawn, boiling water, baking bread, scrubbing the counter like it owed her something. She didn't talk unless spoken to, and even then only with brief answers. But her food tasted like forgiveness, warm, quiet, filling. The first few days, Caleb said little beyond instructions. She followed his pace, learned when he preferred silence and when it was safe to ask what kind of stew he liked. Jasper the dog warmed to her first. Then the chickens, then the kitchen. One afternoon, while folding linens on the porch, she reached up and winced. Caleb saw her grip her shoulder as if it had betrayed her. He looked away, but the image stuck. That night he noticed she salted her dinner but didn't eat it. She always waited until he left the table before she cleared his plate. It was 2 weeks in when the first storm hit, wind howling like ghosts clawing at the shutters. Caleb had gone out to secure the stable door and came back soaked, hat dripping. He found her curled on the kitchen floor, not crying, just holding herself tight as the wind rattled the rafters. He offered a blanket without a word. She took it without thanks. After that, he left an oil lamp lit in the hallway every night. She never asked for anything, but her silences were loud. Maybelle's presence began to shape the house. A red ribbon tied to the window hook, a flower pot with 2 wilted daisies, a stack of folded paper on the mantel, letters never mailed. She polished the silverware, rearranged the spice rack, mended the frayed curtain in the pantry. None of it was hers, but she treated it like it might be one day. Then came the bruises, the deeper ones, the ones that climbed higher. Caleb noticed her hand shaking while slicing potatoes. She dropped a tin plate and froze when it clanged. He saw how she jumped at boot steps, how she flinched from shadows that didn't move. But still he said nothing. Not yet. Instead, he rode farther each day, listening for the wind. Watching the road from Worth Junction, something in him had begun to lean forward like a hound catching scent. The quiet wasn't holding. Then one evening after supper, Maybelle placed a single question between them like a card on a table. "If someone was looking for me," she said without raising her eyes, "you'd tell me first, wouldn't you?" Caleb looked up from his cup. The fire cracked softly. "Someone looking for you." She nodded once, barely. He didn't answer, just met her gaze for the first time that week. Steady, measured. "Yeah," he said finally. "I would." That night she didn't lock her door, and Caleb sat on the porch with a rifle across his lap until the moon sank low. They came into town on a Thursday late morning under a sky thick with dry heat and thunderheads creeping slow across the northern ridge. 3 of them rode abreast, dust-covered, mean-looking, all long-legged and lean like men who slept in their saddles. Their horses were roan and restless. The leader wore a white hat brown with sweat and a black duster that flapped with each lazy hoofbeat. He carried a coach gun slung low and had a scar that cut across his upper lip like a snake that never left. Folks on Main Street watched them ride in and said one name quietly: the Harlan Boys. No one knew if they were brothers by blood, but they came from the same dirt, violence, debt, and rope burn. They'd done wet work for ranchers, busting up union men or claim jumpers. Sometimes they came looking for women. Mostly they came for payback. The saloon cleared when they walked in. The white hat man, who everyone called Price Harlan, ordered a bottle of rye and poured 3 glasses, though one of the others didn't drink, just sat with gloved hands folded over the table, eyes like glass under the brim of a slouched Stetson. The third, a man with missing fingers and a bullet graze across his neck, leaned back and laughed too hard at nothing. They didn't ask for a room. Just questions. "You seen a woman come through?" Price asked the barkeep. "Name of Maybelle. Brown hair, sweet voice. Might be looking scared." The barkeep shook his head. "Ain't heard that name." Price smiled without warmth. "Thing about scared women. They hide real quiet until someone gets curious enough to remember. By sundown, half the town knew. A woman with that name had taken work up on Barrow Hill, with the Widowmaker, with Roe, They didn't ride up that night, not right away. Caleb heard the news from the blacksmith's boy who'd ridden out to warn him under cover of night. 3 fellas asking real direct, the boy whispered, eyes darting. They got the feel of bad meat. Caleb nodded, gave the boy water, a silver coin, and told him to ride home slow and careful. That night, Caleb oiled his rifle and unlocked the cellar door behind the pantry. Maybelle stood there watching, her face pale as chalk. You knew someone would come, she said, not quite asking. I know they're kind, Caleb said, crouching to check the lantern inside the cellar. And they know mine. He didn't ask for details, he didn't press her. But something in his posture had shifted from watchful to ready. The dog began sleeping with one eye open. The rifle leaned closer to the doorframe now. 3 days passed. Then hoofbeats. Maybelle was rolling dough when the wind died. The silence came like a hand pressed to the mouth of the land. Caleb stood from his chair before the knock hit the door. It wasn't loud, just polite, measured. Caleb opened it. Price Harlan smiled. Morning. Hot day already. Not for conversation, Caleb replied. Price tilted his head. Just looking for someone belongs to us. She belonged to you, Caleb asked, not moving from the threshold. Not exactly, but she left with something that's got value. We collect debt, Mr. Rowe. Caleb's jaw tightened. Ain't nothing owed here. Behind him, Maybelle had stepped into the hallway holding a dish towel, her hands flour-covered. Her eyes met Price's. Then the towel dropped. She didn't scream, just turned and vanished down the hall. Now that there, Price said, pointing past Caleb, that's the face I remember. Caleb didn't reach for the rifle. Not yet. He just stepped out, closing the door behind him. The other 2 Harlans sat their horses 10 yards back, hands twitching near pistol grips. You walk off this porch, Caleb said, voice like stone. You don't ride back. Price's smile died slow. You really gonna bury 3 men for a woman ain't yours? She's cooking my food, Caleb said. That makes her mine till she ain't. Then the door opened behind him. Maybelle stood there, her voice shaking but clear. I don't owe you, Price. Not a damn cent. Not a ring. Not a name. You ran, Price said coldly. You broke a deal. I left hell. Price's eyes narrowed, and you walked into another. The first shot came from the one with the gloves fired wide high, meant to scare. But Caleb moved fast. His Henry rifle rose like it was drawn from the marrow of his arm. And his return shot took the man off his horse dead before he hit the dirt. The second came from Price himself. It grazed Caleb's shoulder, spinning him but not down. Caleb fired again, hit the next scared man through the thigh. Screams echoed across the hills, then Price dismounted, pulling his coach gun from his back. You forget who I am, he hissed. I skinned men for less. You got no skin left to save, Caleb growled, advancing, bleeding steady. The 2 men circled. Maybelle screamed for him to stop, but neither heard. Dust rose. Wind returned. The dog barked once, then silence again. 2 shots cracked. Only 1 man stayed standing. Caleb Rowe. Shirt soaked in red. Gun barrel smoking, chest rising slow. Price Harlan lay broken, unmoving, hat blown off, eyes open to the clouds. Caleb stumbled once, then looked at Maybelle. Get the lantern, he said, voice tight. Time to dig. They buried the dead behind the smokehouse under a sky grumbling with thunder but refusing to break. Caleb worked in silence, blood seeping through the linen he'd wrapped around his arm. Maybelle brought water, then bandages, her hands trembling only when she was alone. The ground was hard, but Caleb didn't complain. His shovel struck dirt with the rhythm of a man used to grave digging. When it was done and the 3 Harlans lay quiet in the soil, Caleb burned their saddles and gear. No trophies, no messages, no questions, just fire. But the message had already gone. That evening, Caleb sat on the porch rewrapping his wound while the dog lay curled at his feet, ears twitching. Maybelle stayed in the kitchen, her hands stiff from scrubbing the blood off the floorboards. The smell of lye lingered thick in the air, sharper than the stew she left untouched on the table. The next morning, she packed her bag. I should leave, she said, not looking at him. Caleb nodded slowly. You can. She tightened the strap. He'll come. Price is dead. She shook her head. Price wasn't the one I was running from. He looked at her long and quiet. Then who? She swallowed. My husband. The word felt foreign in the room. He's not a man you can kill with a bullet. He's a man with a badge, Deputy Roy Greaves out of Worth Junction, tied to the sheriff to the circuit judge. They cover for him. I tried to report. They said I fell downstairs. She held out her arms. All these stairs. Caleb stared at her arms, his jaw clenched. He'll come, she repeated. He always does. Caleb leaned back in his chair, eyes on the hills. Then let him. Maybelle hesitated. You're bleeding already. I won't be the reason you're buried too. He looked at her, then straight through. You didn't put the blood in my past. You won't put it in my ground. That night he dug deeper. Not graves, trenches, defensive lines. The root cellar became a second house stocked with food, a lantern, a blanket, and her locket tied to the rafter with twine so it wouldn't get lost. He greased the hinges on the barn doors, moved the horses to the ravine, told Maybelle to sleep dressed boots near the bed, told her to keep the small revolver tucked in the folds of her apron when she cooked. He didn't speak of what he feared, only what he prepared for. 2 days passed. Then the rider came. Not a posse, just one man on a gray gelding. He didn't ride fast, just steady like the law. Roy Greaves wore his badge over a black coat, a holstered Colt on his left hip, a shotgun across his back. He had a preacher's jaw, square, clean-shaven, and a scar near his eye that looked almost surgical. When he dismounted, he called out with the voice of authority. Not shouting, just sure. Maybelle, I know you're here. She froze at the sink dish, still in hand. Caleb rose from the table. She's not going back, he said loud enough to carry through the window. Greaves didn't respond, just stepped up on the porch. Knocked once. I'm here under law, Mr. Rowe. She's my wife. Caleb opened the door. You're not welcome. Greaves smiled faintly. Then arrest me. Behind him, Jasper let out a low growl. She ran from a lawful marriage, Greaves said. And she took something that belongs to me. Caleb's eyes narrowed. A woman ain't property. She's not a woman. She's my wife. That's the difference. He stepped forward, but Caleb's rifle lifted firm, unwavering. Another inch, I drop you. You gonna shoot a deputy? Greaves asked, unflinching. You're not wearing your badge here. Everywhere I walk is the law. From behind, Maybelle stepped into the doorway. Then let's try a confession. Greaves turned. She held the revolver barely steady but aimed. Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. I told the judge what you did. He called me a drunk. I showed the sheriff the bruises. He said I was clumsy. I screamed in the street and they dragged me home. But they won't hear me here. So maybe now you will. Greaves looked at her with something like amusement. You done, or you need to read it from a letter I wrote them all. They burned every one. Caleb stepped beside her. She's not going back. I can come back with 6 men, then ride back now, while you still can. Greaves looked between them, weighing silence. Then he smiled, reached slowly for his coat pocket. Last chance, Caleb warned, rifle raised. But it wasn't a gun. It was a folded telegram. Greaves tossed it on the porch floor. Court summons. Her name's on it. I do this right. I do it slow. He turned, mounted, and rode off without another word. When the dust settled, Maybelle fell to her knees. The next week passed in stillness. Every hoofbeat in the distance made her start. Every bird landing on the roof made her jump. She stopped cooking full meals. Caleb made his own coffee. They spoke less. Watched the road more. Then on the 7th morning, the telegram was gone. Not stolen. Burned. In its place, Caleb found the locket nailed into the porch beam. That night, she handed him her satchel. Hide me, she whispered. Not just in dirt, in name, in life. He nodded once. He opened the cellar. She stepped inside, closed the latch herself. And Caleb, for the second time in his life, chose silence over justice. But the storm was only just beginning. Dawn came thick with haze. The wind had gone still again, the kind of quiet that made horses restless and dogs pace. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and scanned the ridgeline like he had each morning for 2 weeks. But this time something was different. A plume of dust rose in the east, not fast but steady, and behind it 3 riders came into view, too clean for drifters, too loose for cavalry. One held a paper. Caleb waited. They stopped 20 yards from the gate, their horses stamping nervously. The man in front, a lean figure in a flat-brim hat with wire spectacles, raised the paper and read aloud. Warrant issued by the district circuit. One Maybelle Cutter, known fugitive. Accomplice Caleb Rowe, obstruction of law, harboring of person under indictment. He looked up. We'd like a peaceful surrender, Mr. Rowe. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. This is land under my name. Another rider, a deputy by his silver star, spoke next. That's not how law works. We know she's here, and so do they. From behind them, another horse crested the hill. Roy Greaves. But this time he wore no badge. He didn't need one. Maybelle watched from the cellar grate, breath-shallow fingers gripping the edge. She could hear Caleb's boots cross the porch boards, slow and deliberate. She could hear the creak of leather as he raised his rifle again. Then Roy's voice. Caleb, he called calmly. You're making this worse than it needs to be. No worse than what you already done, Caleb answered. I got every right to reclaim my wife. You lost that right when she started fearing door hinges and thunder. Roy's expression never changed. You don't know what she is. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Tell me. Roy dismounted slowly like a man about to preach. He stepped toward the porch, hands empty. You think she's some little dove. She's the one who pushed her sister down the well, broke her legs, told the sheriff it was an accident. I was the one who buried that secret for her. I protected her from charges. He looked toward the cellar grate. Isn't that right, Maybelle? Her breath caught. The memory she never spoke of rising like bile. The scream, the splash, her sister's pale arms reaching from the dark water, her own hands on the stone lip. The silence after. Caleb didn't look back. Is that true? Maybelle's voice cracked through the grate. She didn't die. She was pulled out. Roy, he made me say I did it. Told the judge I confessed, but I never pushed her. Roy laughed low. You lying little garden snake. You begged me to make it go away. I begged you to stop hitting me. Caleb stepped off the porch, rifle still in hand. You buried the truth. And now you come with paper and law and try to make it smell clean. She's sick, Roy hissed. You'll see it. Give it a year. Caleb stopped 10 paces away. Even if that's true, I'd still choose her over a man like you. Roy's hand moved toward his belt. Caleb fired. The bullet struck Roy's leg, dropping him fast. The deputies reached for iron but didn't fire. The man with spectacles dropped the paper and backed his horse. You just shot a man in front of the law, one deputy barked. No law here, Caleb growled. Only choices. He walked past Roy, who clutched his thighs, snarling. I'll drag you to hell with me, Roy spat. You been there already, Caleb said, stepping over him. He opened the cellar door. Maybelle rose, her eyes wild with disbelief. They'll come back, she whispered, with more paper, with more men. Then we'll go, Caleb said. New names, new place, but I did hold her under. For a second, I was angry. I let go, but that second was real. He looked at her long and hard. Then carry it. But you don't have to carry it alone. She stared at him like a woman seeing a thing she thought impossible. Not mercy, but belief. That night they left. The ranch lay quiet, the porch empty, the rifle gone. Only Jasper remained sleeping beside the cold stove, and on the cellar rafter the locket swung gently in the breeze. Years passed, and the story spread in quiet corners, the widowmaker who vanished, the cook who left no trail, the deputy who limped from the hills bleeding justice. No charges were pressed, no lawman returned. The ranch changed hands, but no one ever lived in the main house again. They said it creaked too loud at night, like footsteps in the cellar, like whispers in the floorboards. In the town of Dry Hollow, an older woman ran a bakery just past the church, her hands always dusted in flour, her eyes sharp and cautious. She wore a locket beneath her apron, never spoke of her past, and kept a rifle above the flour bin. Locals called her Miss Bell, never Maybelle. She never corrected them. Each week a man with a limp would ride through but never stop his gray gelding thinner, each year his eyes darker. He passed the bakery once, looked through the window, then rode on. She never came to the window. She only turned the stove higher, let the biscuits rise. As for Caleb Rowe, some claimed he died crossing the border. Others swore he was seen working cattle under another name further west where the trees turn red in autumn. One child once said she saw him in the bakery eating cornbread by the fire, his boots wet with morning dew, his silence warm. Not cold. No one believed her. But every morning Miss Bell lit a single oil lamp by the stove before sunrise, left a second plate at the table, sat quiet, ate slow. Jasper died old under the porch he never left. They buried him beneath the window, his collar still dusty, the tag engraved with one word, home. And in the old ranch, boarded now, something still flickered, a faint light in the cellar grate when storms rolled over the ridge. A swing of the locket when no wind blew. A silence that wasn't empty but waiting. Some say ghosts haunt for revenge, others say they stay for love. But sometimes they remain not to punish or to protect, but to remind that someone made a choice when they didn't have to. And it changed everything. If you listen close when the fire's low and the world's asleep, you might hear the scrape of a chair on old pine floorboards. You might smell cornbread baking. And you might feel just faintly that you are not alone. Because some fires don't go out. They just burn quieter, like stories, like names we bury, like the echo of a gunshot that meant more than justice. A gentle but profound statement. Sometimes the loudest mercy comes from a man who says nothing and stays. Watch the next story and subscribe to the channel for more tales that echo long after the last word.